So by now, you've probably seen our announcement video. And yes, we are expecting a second child this June. And yes, my husband and I are the biological parents of that child that's currently being carried by our co parent, and that we will be raising together as a trio, just like with our first. And some of you might be wondering, how do you make a baby that way? Well, this video is to clue you in as I go over our fertility journey. And it really starts way back in 2015 when Hannah first approached Andrew, my then boyfriend, her then roommate, and asked if he would be her donor so that she could be a single parent by choice. And after talking about it, they agreed what made the most sense was to continue to live together and raise the child together. They invited me into that conversation and I said yes almost immediately. I mean, it just made sense. Even though I'm transgender and I could have become pregnant myself, I don't want to. And it seemed like a great way to start a family. And as part of those early conversations, we agreed almost right away that Andrew and Hannah would be the biological parents of that child. We wanted to finish our education first, move in together, talk to our families about all this, put our finances together, take parenting classes, and make a parenting agreement, all of which took many years. And as part of that process, we talked about how many children we might want to have, and we agreed that 2 would be a good number. I think Hannah honestly would have gone up to 4, but 2 seemed manageable. We initially started trying in spring 2020. We began with the good old turkey baster method, but when that didn't seem to be working, we began to seek fertility treatment. Unfortunately, we had a really hard time finding a clinic that would work with us because of our family structure. Because if Andrew was just a sperm donor or Hannah was just a surrogate, there's like a framework for that. But those terms aren't just like labels. They come with extra costs, expenses, mandatory counseling, and they're also just not accurate. We live in Ontario where up to 4 people can all be on the birth certificate. And that was the plan. We were all going to be equal co-parents. We were actually turned away from one clinic because of our family structure. And another one, we were expected to play straight with Andrew and Hannah acting like they were a married couple and me just pretending not to exist. But hey, whatever we could do to make our baby, we were going to do it. Now, fertility treatment, notoriously expensive. Because we live in Ontario, there is actually some coverage if you're willing to sit on the wait list. The meds are not covered, but Hannah had pretty good insurance. First, we did a round of IUI. That didn't work, so then we went for IVF, in vitro fertilization. And essentially, Hannah was pumped full of a bunch of hormones, and so she grew a bunch of extra eggs for an ovulation cycle. Those eggs were monitored until they looked like they were basically ready to go. She was given something called a trigger shot, and then went in for a procedure where the eggs were removed, fertilized in a lab, grown into embryos for 5 days, and then tested to see which of those embryos would be most likely viable. And then those embryos, one at a time, could be transferred into her uterus until one stuck. It was a pretty intimidating process, and it meant a lot of labor for Hannah. And again, this was COVID, so we couldn't even be in the clinic with her, which was really hard. But we tried to support her as best we could. We did like even the home injections and stuff with her. And then thankfully, the egg retrieval process went pretty smoothly. We managed to create a bunch of embryos, and on our second transfer, she was pregnant. That was spring 2021, and so she was due early 2022. And on her due date, she found out she had preeclampsia and had to be induced and went through a 33-hour labor. And when the baby was born, there were some complications. They had to go to the NICU for a while. And I just remember it was such an intense period. And I remember just feeling so like terrified, exhausted, elated. Finally, when things started to calm down, I remember it was less than a day afterwards. And there was a nurse with the baby and Andrew was on a coffee run. And she and I were just sitting there talking to each other in the postpartum suite. And she looked at me and she said, I could totally do this again. And I was like, okay. And she said, you've talked about maybe wanting to be a bio parent one day. How do you imagine doing that? And I said, well, would you ever consider me doing an egg retrieval and then you carrying the embryo? And she said, yeah, sure. And Andrew came into the room and was completely bamboozled because he was already at his max capacity. Like I said, the birth had been really stressful. I mean, especially for Hannah, but really for all of us. And he was like, maybe we can just focus on like surviving the present. We're like, okay. And yeah, the new birth stage was really hard. Our child had like colic, and even with 3 of us, we were like struggling with exhaustion. And we were living in this like kind of crappy rental in downtown Toronto, and it was definitely not baby friendly or us friendly. And like, we just really didn't know what we were doing, which is one of the hardest parts. Like, you're just constantly worried you're doing it wrong. But after a year, when things kind of calmed down, we revisited that conversation. And on the spectrum of yay or nay, Andrew was very much like, I don't know if I could do that again. And Hannah was like, I'm absolutely having a second kid with or without you. And I was kind of in the middle. So we agreed to start taking baby steps. And the first one was for me to do the egg retrieval. So I got myself on the IVF waitlist. I found a new fertility clinic that would work with our 3-parent family. Because remember, the first one, I wasn't supposed to exist. And thankfully, I did find a new clinic. And basically, their mindset was like, yeah, you don't fit our paperwork, but that's our problem, not yours. We also agreed to upgrade our housing to have a little more room for a second child. We managed to find a new rental in Toronto that was a little bit bigger. And the landlords were planning to sell the place in a couple of years and said, look, if you're in a position to buy, we'll sell it to you. So we began to plan to enter into home ownership together. Finally, April 2023, I got the call. It was time for my egg retrieval. I said, yes, okay. I went off testosterone. Now, I've been on T since 2009 when I was 19 years old. So it had been a while and I wasn't sure how long I was going to have to be off. But the clinic assured me my fertility probably wasn't severely impacted by long-term testosterone use. Based on a study out of Boston IVF, it shows that most trans men maintain fertility the same as like a cis woman. It's just less likely to get pregnant if you're not ovulating. But once I went off T, I didn't even have to resume periods or anything. They just kind of pumped me full of the hormones. I did a bunch of like egg production, apparently. They tracked me very closely, then said, okay, you ready to go? I did my trigger shot. They did the retrieval. And 7 weeks later, I was ready to go back on T, which was amazing. And the egg retrieval, again, went fairly smoothly. We got 9 eggs retrieved, 8 of which were like mature, ready to be fertilized. 5 of them became fertilized, and 3 of those fertilized embryos made it to day 5 growing in a lab. So we had 3 viable embryos. And we put them on ice because we were not ready to do a transfer right then and there. Again, this was pretty nerve-wracking. And I actually opted not to go back on T right away because I had to have surgery on an unknown mass in my pelvic floor. And I kind of just wanted my body to like rest and recover. Thankfully, the mass turned out to be non-cancerous, so that was great. And about 4 months after I went off, I was able to finally start T again. I did actually briefly consider not going back on because like I've already got a beard. My voice is not going back up. I'm basically as trans as I'm going to get. But when I did take that shot after being off for so long, I was like, oh yeah, this is what feels good to me. This is how I feel like myself. And I'm definitely going to start taking this again. Now, spring 2024, we were gearing up to do the transfer and starting to get kind of excited about this idea. Maybe a 3-year age gap would feel kind of cool. And just when we're starting to get in the headspace for it, we get a call from our landlords and we find out that they're not going to be selling us the house. They're not going to be selling the house at all, but instead moving back in and we got to move out. They did give us a lot of notice, which I appreciated, but it was very stressful. We realized we were probably going to have to move out of the city, which also meant quitting all of our jobs and like restarting our lives and community and all this stuff. And we were like, man, maybe this isn't a good time to have a second kid. But as you might remember, we had struggled to find a fertility clinic that would work with us. And the transfer process is kind of intense. So we probably would have to find a new clinic outside the city, which may or may not happen. So we decided, even though it seemed completely bananas to do, was to move and attempt to get pregnant in the same year. So in late spring, early summer, we do a transfer. Hannah does get pregnant, but didn't stay, which I didn't really talk about online because it's kind of personal. But it was a really hard time. And Hannah got really, really sick afterwards. And it just felt like an absolute low. And we were looking at the housing market and mortgage rates were not good. Rentals were not good. And we just didn't really know what we were going to do. It was like a really tough time in our family. But there was nothing to do but keep going. We found a realtor to work with and we began shopping around. We figured out a region we wanted to live in, Kitchener to Waterloo, and we started viewing homes there and we kind of found our dream house. It was terrifying, but thrilling. We put in an offer and it was accepted. So, okay, we had a plan. We knew where we were going. We tried to transfer again that fall and it worked. October 2024, the same month we got possession of our house, Hannah was pregnant again. And of course, we were terrified that it wasn't going to stay. Every single moment of stress during the move and everything afterwards had me like so worried that that was going to be it and we were going to lose the baby. But so far, things seem to be going good. Hannah's feeling okay for somebody who is entering their 3rd trimester. And we decided it was time to tell the internet. I do try to keep a lot of my personal life offline. I don't want to be making content exclusively about our family. I don't want to be a family vlogger because it's our lives, right? But I also think there's a lot of value in telling our story and sharing it with other people and showing that this kind of life is possible and that it can feel really great and that children raised in this kind of environment can really thrive. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who want to make their own family and make a family like this one, but just don't know how and don't even know that it is an option. So that's our story. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Please let me know whatever questions you have. I will try to answer any that I feel I can. And I look forward to giving you updates as we move towards the new baby arriving. Oh my God, we have so much to do. But yeah, thanks so much, and I'll see you in a week.